Hey guys, so yesterday we reviewed solving quadratic equations using the three methods that we've gone over before vacation, and that was by undoing PEMDAS, only if there's one variable in the equation that you can isolate. And if you can't do that, then we can factor and use the zero product property, but this is only if your quadratic can be factored. Right? And then the third method we used was completing the square, which we know we can always rely on. And when you are solving the quadratic equation for x, assuming that y is 0, remember we're just looking for the x-intercepts. So the very last method, I'm going to teach you guys one more method to solve a quadratic equation today. It's the easiest one, and this one is very useful because it can be used for any quadratic equation. So even if it's factorable, even if you can complete the square, you can always rely on the quadratic formula. So this final method can be used for any quadratic equation, but it's gotta be for a quadratic equation. So let's look at what that is. So the quadratic formula says that given ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, given any quadratic in standard form, where y is equal to 0, we can solve for x by using this formula. X is always going to be equal to negative b, so we can identify our a, b, and c values from standard form, but x is always going to be equal to negative b plus or minus the square root, because remember we said if we take the square root, it's always a positive or negative value. The square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. So using this formula, we can find the x-intercepts of any quadratic. But we gotta make sure that your equation is in standard form and that it's set equal to 0. Okay, so if we look at the first example, 2x squared plus 3x equals 5. If I want to solve by using the quadratic formula, the first thing I'm going to do is move that 5 to the left so that it's in standard form. So we're going to have x squared 2x squared plus 3x minus 5 equal to 0. And now my equation is in standard form, set equal to 0. I'm ready to use the quadratic formula. So let's identify what a, b, and c is. So a is 2, b is 3, and c is negative 5. Right, so according to the formula, x can be calculated by negative b, so that's negative 3. If b is already negative, then you take the negative of that, which will become positive. So right now it's negative 3 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's 3 squared, minus 4 times 2 times negative 5, all divided by 2 times a, which is 2. So all we're doing in this first step, in the second step, is substituting what a, b, and c is into the equation exactly as it is shown. And then we're going to simplify. So we're going to simplify what's inside the square root first. That's going to give me 9. 3 squared is 9. And then you've got 4 times 2 is 8, times negative 5 is negative 40. And then you're subtracting a negative 40, so it's really positive 40. All over 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, keep simplifying. X equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 49, ooh, I like that, all over 4. Okay, I like that because I can take the square root of 49. That's a nice number. And if you can't take that square root, then you try to simplify it. and you leave it as a radical. So x equals -3 plus or minus the square root of 49 is 7 over 4. Okay, so we have two separate answers. We have x as -3 plus 7 divided by 4. And we also have x equals -3 minus 7 divided by 4. So that first option, that's going to give me 4 divided by 4, which is 1. And then the second option, that's going to give me -10 divided by 4, which gives me -5 over 2 as a fraction. So these are your two solutions for x. What x value would make that equation true? X could be 1 or x could be -5/2. And to check that, you can put it back into the equation and see if it makes it true. And if you were to graph the equation in standard form, 1 and -5/2 would be your x-intercept. So all you're doing is finding a, b, and c and putting it into the equation and simplifying. So be very careful with your arithmetic. I'm going to have you try the next one on your own using the quadratic formula. Check with each other, and then so go ahead and pause the video, try it on your own and with a partner, and then fast forward in the video to see if you got the correct answer. If you did, we're going to move on to the next one, and then if you didn't, you can rewind back and watch how I did it. So number 1, it's already set equal to 0, it's already in standard form, so that's good. We can just identify a, b, and c. So a is -3, b is 5, and c is -2. Quadratic formula, x can be calculated by doing -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So x equals -5 plus or minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times -3 times -2 all over 2 times -3. Please show all your work. So on a quiz or test, even if you made a arithmetic mistake, if you show me that you can substitute it into the equation, this first step, each step is going to be worth a point. And then once you substitute in, then you simplify what's inside the square root first. Don't try to do too many steps in your head. 5 squared is 25. Okay, and then you got 4 times -3 times -2. So -3 times -2, that's going to give you 6 times 4 is 24. So minus 24 all over -6. Keep simplifying. Inside a square root, I've got 1. That's nice, because I can take the square root of 1. It is just 1. Alright, so now I have two separate answers that I'm going to split up. X could be -5 plus 1 divided by -6, or x could be -5 minus 1 divided by -6. So x is equal to -4 over -6, which reduces to 2 over 3, or x is -6 divided by -6, which is just 1. And so your answers are 2/3 and 1. Okay, the next one, number 2, I'd like us to do together because that's a little tricky. We'll do that one together and I'll let you try 3 on your own. So equation already set equal to 0, I can identify my a, b, and c. So a is 1, b is -2, c is -4. Just gonna put the quadratic formula on the side. If you write it out each time that you use it, it'll help you remember it. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. There's a song on YouTube. You can look it up and try to sing it to memorize it. So, quadratic formula is one of those equations that should be remembered from Algebra 2. There's only one equation that you remember from Algebra 2. It should be the quadratic formula. Just like how a squared plus b squared equals c squared is very important in geometry, quadratic formula is super important in Algebra 2 and in pre-calc. So let's apply the quadratic formula. So x equals, now negative b, because my b is already negative, negative of negative 2 would turn it positive, so just 2, plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 4 all over 2 times 1. Keep simplifying. X equals 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared. So that's negative 2 times negative 2 is 4 plus 16. Okay, negative 4 times 1 is negative 4 times the other negative 4 is 16 all over 2. And then we've got 2 plus or minus the square root of 20. Don't know what the square root of 20 is. Can't simplify that. I can't find the exact value of that, but I can simplify it. So remember how we simplify radicals, right? The square root of 20, I'm going to break it up into 4 times 5. And then that's going to be 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 is 2 times the square root of 5 all over 2. And I'm going to try to reduce the fraction. So to do that, other tricky part, you would have to break it up. Break it up as 2 over 2 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 5 over 2. Okay, it's just like undoing the combining the fractions, because if you have fractions with the common denominator, you would just combine the numerator. So we're just separating it back up so that we can reduce this. So then 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 2 divided by 2 is 1. So you would have x equals 1 plus or minus 1 times the square root of 5. And those are your two solutions. 1 plus the square root of 5 and 1 minus the square root of 5. Alright, so if you have the square root of a number that you can't take the square root of, simplify the radical, and then reduce the fraction if you can. So go ahead and try 3 with a partner and on your own. And again, pause and then fast forward and check to see if you got the right answer. If you did, move on. If not, rewind and watch how I did it. So first things first, you gotta move that 2 and put it into standard form. So let's minus 2 on both sides. I've got x squared plus 3x minus 2 equal to 0, and now I'm in standard form. A is 1, b is 3, c is negative 2. Quadratic formula, x can be calculated by negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Applying the quadratic formula, x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 2 all over 2 times 1. Simplifying what's inside a square root. 3 squared is 9. And then negative 4 times 1 is negative 4 times negative 2 is positive 8 over 2. X equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 17. Not very nice. All over 2. Okay. and can't take the square root of 17, but I also can't break it up into factors that I can take the square root of. And then I also can't reduce the fraction because I can't reduce 3 over 2. So this is it. Negative 3 plus the square root of 17 over 2, and negative 3 minus the square root of 17 all over 2, whatever that is as a decimal. Alright, and very last one. Okay, looks complicated, but remember our first step is to change it to standard form by moving everything to one side and setting the equation equal to 0. So we're going to do this one together because this one, the answer is a little interesting. When I'm minus 12x, I'm going to move everything to the left. So that's going to give me 25x squared. And then that's going to give me negative 30x equals negative 9. And like I'm going to move that 9 as well by adding it to both sides. So 25x squared minus 30x plus 9 equals 0. So my A, B, and C values are 25, negative 30, and 9. Quadratic formula says x can be calculated by negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So x is equal to negative of negative 30 is positive 30 plus or minus the square root of negative 30 squared. Whenever you square a negative number, it becomes positive. Minus 4 times 25 times 9 all over 2 times 25. Okay, and you can use a calculator for this one because the numbers are a little big to help you simplify. If you need to, but you can also do it by hand. So 30 squared, that's 30 times 30, 3 times 3 is 9, and then you add 2 zeros, so 900. Okay, minus 4 times 25, that's 100, times 9 is also 900. All over 2 times 25 is 50. Okay, so you got x equals 30 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 50. And what's the square root of 0? 0 times 0 is 0, right? So the square root of 0 is just 0. I'm going to move over here. So when what's inside the square root of 0, think about how many answers we're going to have. 30 plus or minus 0 divided by 50. Well, 30 plus 0 is 30, and 30 minus 0 is 30. So when you're adding and subtracting 0, that doesn't change anything. X is going to be just 30 over 50. There's only one answer. And I can reduce that. X is equal to 3/5. Okay, one answer, which means that if I were to graph this equation in standard form right here, my x-intercept would only be at 1 point, 3/5. So for your homework, I'd like you guys to work on the 6 problems that are attached, solved by using the quadratic formula. Please show all your work. The answers will be posted on Schoology, but show all your work in order to receive credit, and be very careful with your arithmetic. All right, write the steps out. Don't skip steps.